Hey guys, I actually think this is going to be a quick video, famous last words at the beginning of the video, but let's go right to it. Social psychology is born. Again, I've kind of alluded to this before. Everything I'm going to talk about, I think you know these experiments and you know these results. Maybe a little bit more in the cognitive dissonance. That's always a kind of challenging one. So I'll talk about that in a little more detail. But otherwise, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about these things because, again, I think you know them. And if you don't, there's fantastic videos all over YouTube that can, give you all the information you need. So, rather than actually talking about what all of these people did, their sort of claim to fame research wise, I really want to emphasize the thread that's going through from Gestalt to social psychology. And so we had, the proper Gestalt. And just to keep keep things in mind there, the idea there was that when we're talking about perception, we can't just think about it as bottom up. We've perceived these things, a lot of the things we've perceived in the past, and we have memories of that perception. And it turns out those memories are actually, part of our understanding of that thing. And when we start very early on perceiving something, things that our brain thinks that might be start to get triggered and start to interact with that processing that's coming in. And so that the processing ends up being, yes, bottom up, but also influences from the top down. So that sort of idea that we have this complex system that's not just from, raw input up to what it's built into, but instead that there's a lot of other things going on, a lot of other influences from higher above. That's going to come into social psychology as well. We saw it coming into things like insight with Kohlers, right? This idea that, they figured out, and now that can interact with their interaction with the world. And of course, we saw it with things like Levine when he was talking about a person's life context, right? Now what we're going to do with social psychology is say part of that context includes the other people in our life. So social psychology is really going to say the way we act isn't just determined by our own inner processing, but in fact is partly determined by the other human beings in our environment. And they affect the way we perceive things, think about things, and of course the way we behave. So let's jump into that. And I'm going to jump into it first with Leon Festinger. As the textbook says, an incredibly clever empiricist who came up with a bunch of studies. Before we even look at any of this, let me start in the upper right corner, and then I'm going to tell you about one of his studies that's alluded to in the textbook, but they don't really talk about it as clearly as I'd like them to. And then that'll get us into here, and Trump's just Trump. So I will come back to that in a moment. The end is near. So Leon Festinger, the story goes like this, that he was around at this time when there was this woman who was proclaiming that the end of the world is near. And she knew this because she had aliens speaking to her. And in fact, the claim is she would use her non-dominant hand, her left hand maybe, if that's not dominant for her, and she would sit there with a pen in it, and the hand would just write things. And what she told people is what was going on there is that's when the aliens were communicating with her. They would communicate with her, and they would sort of take control of her arm that would write things, and these would be messages that she would be receiving from the aliens. And what they told her was the end of the world is coming, and they gave a specific date. But they also told her that, they were there to save some humans. And so if there was enough of a group of them gathered in a certain location, these aliens would come and rescue them from the earth before it was destroyed. And so she was basically reaching out to people and saying, hey, do you want to be part of this saved group? Join with me, be part of the group the aliens rescue. Now, Leon Festinger saw this and thought, what you're probably thinking, this is ridiculous, silly, nobody would believe this. But some people did believe it. And some people joined her. And so there was a bunch of people who were starting to join her, and they were doing things like selling all their possessions because the aliens said, you don't need all these possessions. You might as well get rid of them all because you're going to be in space and we're not going to take all the stuff with us. And so they were selling their possessions and doing things like that, which Festinger thought was really unwise. And then he came up with this great idea. Okay, they've picked a date. That's when the world's going to end. I'd like to talk to these people the day after. The day after the world was supposed to end but doesn't end if you talk to these people and you say, how are you feeling right now? Are they going to say, I feel like an idiot. I believed this woman. She said this ridiculous stuff and I believed it and I sold all my stuff and it never happened and now I feel like an idiot. You would kind of think that's what people might think. However, they did not. He had trouble finding anybody who thought they were an idiot. Of course, the woman was saying, oh, the aliens got in touch with her again. Something messed up. The world isn't going to end exactly when they thought. It's going to be a little later on. Join with her again. And what Festinger found is that the people who had believed her once clung to that, hung to that, and literally did not want to admit that they had done something really stupid. And they kept believing her stories even when they got more and more ridiculous. I mean, let's face it, they started kind of ridiculous, but they continued with her and her views. And so he thought, why is this? And he started to think it had something to do with humans not wanting to accept that they were kind of dumb, that they might reorganize their mind to get rid of the dissonance of seeing themselves doing something stupid when they didn't think they were stupid. And so this is the dissonance, the disconnect. And so he created an experiment. So let me tell you the experiment. The experiment went like this. You came in, let's say, to the experimental room, and the experimenter says, here's this pen. I want you to tap, but I want you to try to tap as quickly as you can while keeping your rate constant. And you're going to have to do this for 20 minutes. Okay? So you're sitting there trying to keep a constant rate as well as you can. And then once you get this, you do it for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Okay, so you do that. At the end of the experiment, the interesting part happens. Leon Festinger says, you know what? I'm really busy and I've got something I have to do, but there's another participant waiting. Can you go please tell that participant about the experiment so that I don't have to, give them instructions? And by the way, if you could maybe tell them that it's a cool, interesting experiment, so they're actually a little motivated about it, that would be great. Okay, so please. Oh, and by the way, you get some money for your participation. And half the participants got $20, half got $2. And the question is, how did the amount of money they get paid affect what they say to that next participant, who, by the way, was not actually a participant? They are what we call a confederate. They are somebody that was in on the experiment. So what they found is the people that got paid $20 essentially said this: that experiment you're about to do, it is boring. It is just, oh my goodness, but you get $20. The $2 group said, that was a really interesting experiment. It was really fascinating. It's amazing what you can kind of learn from yourself when you're trying to do this and all the sort of processes at play. I was amazed by everything that was going on in such a simple task. So basically, they described it in better terms, the experiment, even though, or if you're Festinger, because they got paid less. And his notion was this: why did they describe it better? Well, for the $20 group, they could say, I just did a really boring thing, but I did it for $20. And it seems like that's not stupid necessarily. Well, many of us do boring things for money, right? But if you do something really boring for almost nothing, that's kind of dumb, right? And so if you accept that this was really, really boring and I didn't get a lot of money and I wasted a bunch of time, you're kind of left thinking that was not a very clever thing to do. So instead of believing that about yourself, the participants started to think that was actually really interesting. I didn't get paid much for it, but I got paid in a different way. I learned about myself and it was really fascinating. So what he would say is when, they have this belief that I'm a smart person, but their actions suggest otherwise. And think of either one of these examples that I just described. That creates dissonance. Dissonance is like noise, things that don't go well together. And you want to reduce that dissonance. This is your goal, to reduce that. And there's a few different ways of doing that. And one of them is to change your belief about the task, for example. And that's what the $2 group, that belief is actually kind of interesting. You can actually change your action. You can bail out of one of these things and say, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. And in fact, he ended up talking about 2 or 3 or 4 different strategies people could use to reduce this dissonance, rather than admit that what they did didn't make a lot of sense. Okay, so it's a really complex theory, and I really challenge you to kind of get into it deeper and look at some YouTube videos, but that's the basic idea. Now, if we step back from that again, the idea here is, why don't we want to look stupid? Is it that we don't want to look stupid, or do we don't want to believe ourselves to be stupid, or we don't want other human beings to think of us as being stupid? Where was the force that made that such a difficult thing to accept? And the claim started to be, it's the other people. We don't want to look stupid in front of other people. What's Trump doing here, by the way? This is just, this notion is sometimes brought into to talk about, he had 40% of people that voted for him, and they continue to stick with him, even though he does things like pack stadiums full of people without masks during a pandemic. He does things that do not look very leader-esque, and yet the 40% stick with him. Why? Well, because the same idea. They didn't think they were stupid when they voted for him, and they have trouble suddenly just saying, you know what, that was a stupid thing to do. Instead, they will continue to follow, much like they did in the first case. Okay, so kind of an interesting phenomenon, but the bigger story again is this idea of starting to think that people's actions might be determined by how they think others will think of them. Okay, that their social context, Lewin talked about their life context, but their social context may have a strong sort of top-down effect on how they think about things and how they behave. So that's the Gestalt thing again, but now it's the social context that's coming down, okay? Salman Ash. I'm not going to do this video, but I've got it there for you to watch. If I do it, I'll get blocked again, so I'm not going to do it. But you guys have all seen this before. This is that very simple experiment where participants were shown lines of different lengths. So they were shown an ABC, and then they were shown a separate one, and they were asked which of the ABC matches the length of the one on the right. But the famous condition is one where we have 3 or 4 Confederates. You don't know that. You're the subject. You don't know that they're in on it. You think they're all subjects. And they all pick the wrong line. And now it comes to you, and it's your turn. And what Ash found is that even though people could easily see what the right answer was, they often went along with the others, what he called a conformity effect. They wanted to conform with the group. They wanted to fit in. And in fact, he claimed that for some people, this was just an explicit thing. They knew what one was wrong, but they really wanted to fit in, and so they said what everybody else said anyway. Whereas for other people, he claimed that their judgment of the line was actually affected by the social pressure, the peer pressure, and that they actually wanted to fit in so bad they saw that line as the same length as the other people did. Okay, so again, we're having these other people, and their behavior is affecting this person. So it's not just them staring at the line and going, well, it's obviously that, but there's this social context that's affecting how they do that. Okay, Salman Ash with his conformity stuff. And again, let's just do a couple of quick hits. Stanley Milgram. You know Stanley Milgram. This is the authority experiments, where we have somebody come in, and this is the real participant. Again, this is a fake participant, but we make them think they're both real participants. We flip a coin. We say one of you is student, one of you is teacher. The student goes in here and gets hooked up to an electrical system. They are given multiple choice questions by the teacher, and every time they get it wrong, the teacher is supposed to shock them. Not only are they supposed to shock them, but they're supposed to, on this nasty looking box, turn up the level of shock. And in the background is Stanley Milgram, usually, but an experimenter who would do the following. At some point, the student starts complaining and saying, the shock is too much. I don't like it. I don't want to do this. I want to stop. And the teacher would usually feel a little uncomfortable and look back at Milgram, and Milgram would say things like, please continue. It's important you continue. He never was tyrannical. He was just gently but firmly pushing it. The experiment requires you to continue. Please continue. And at some point on this shock journey, say somewhere around here when it's pretty high shock, the student actually goes quiet, as though he may be dead. after complaining about pain and heart conditions. And at this point, he's not answering at all. And then the experimenter says, hey, if he doesn't answer, treat it like a wrong answer. Zap him and turn it up. And some people were feeling very uncomfortable now, these teachers, and they were saying, are you sure? And Stanley would just say the experiment requires you to continue. And what they found that was so scary was that, all the way to XX, this is the labeling that was on this machine here, slight, moderate, very strong, even up to XX, over 60% of participants kept shocking the student. And so this was very scary at the time, but what it showed is that this context, this authority figure, right? So instead of your broad social context now of friends, one strong authority figure sitting behind you and asking you to continue can push somebody to do things that they never thought they would do. By the way, the Milgram experiment, probably when you think of this, I'm sure you've heard it before and thought about it before, but if it's the first time, you're probably thinking, is that ethical to do that to somebody? At the time of this experiment, there wasn't a lot of ethical standards out there. And in fact, it was this experiment and the next one that I will mention that really made psychologists seriously adopt ethics. But again, the big picture here to get from it is now we have authority affecting how this person is processing the whole situation in very extreme ways. So once again, the context within which they are, and in this case, it is a social context because it's another person of higher authority than them. Okay. The thing that I found amazing that it wasn't in this chapter, and I don't think it comes later, is Phil Zimbardo's famous Stanford prison experiment. And I'm sure you know the prison experiment as well, so I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail, but I just want to highlight for you guys that this is another situation where the context, whether you're a guard or whether you're a prisoner within this fake context, suddenly changed the way the people reacted, the people within the experiment. And so the context, when he says understanding how good people turn evil, if they live in a context that rewards evil and punishes good, then they will fit their context. And so they will become evil. So The Lucifer Effect is a book by Phil Zimbardo where he's talking specifically about the Abu Ghraib prison scandal in Iraq and how certain American soldiers really did a lot of evil things there. But it's really taken directly from the original Stanford prison experiment. So he talks about that prison experiment and he goes further. I just wanted to mention it. I found it missing in the chapter. It's another example of how our context, be it place, be it people, be it authority figures, all of those things affect us. And, that's what social psychology is really about, is the effect other people have on how we function. And so in that way, it's an extension of the Gestalt thing. Okay, cool. Hopefully we're there now. That's the end of chapter 10. We will be moving on to chapter 11, the fascinating research methods chapter. You'll like it. You will. Later. Bye-bye.